Gentle readers, welcome to Everything is Everything. I'm Amit, this is my good friend Ajay, and this is an ancient manuscript that we have found which looks like a leaf, but don't be fooled by it. There are mysterious words on it in a mysterious language, and we don't quite know what those words mean, but we're trying to figure it out. And speaking of words, one thing that I've often found in the kind of conversations that we have is that we'll often use a lot of terms kind of casually. And one thing that I've sort of been thinking about is that a lot of these terms seem to mean one thing, but they actually have the technical meaning and the sense in which economists and political scientists use them is completely different. Like, for example, nationalism, you would think, is good for the nation, but not necessarily so the way it's used in political science. Populism, you would think, why do people say bad things about populism? Populism must mean what is popular. Democracy mein to achhi baat hai. But actually, no, populism is toxic, and there is a specific sense in which political scientists use it. And not only do I feel that for its own sake, we should demystify some of this, but as you have pointed out really strongly, that this is actually a good time as well to talk about populism. It is important to do so. Why is that?
So first, I just want to add to what you said. Speaking for me personally, I'm just a clueless economist. For years and years, for me, the word populism was sort of like popular. And what's wrong with popular? Okay, and maybe many others might feel similarly. Maybe you, gentle reader, are well educated, but I was under this delusion for a very long time. And only later I understood the subtleties around the word populism, and we're going to do it at more depth today. But this to conflate the word popular and populism or populist is not correct, and these subtleties matter greatly. And more generally, I think all the fields appropriate common English words. Okay, if you've been a regular user of Everything is Everything, I'm sure by now you're sick of the words market failure and public good. But basically, if you can correctly say market failure, if you can correctly say public good, if you can correctly say adverse selection, and if you can correctly say moral hazard, then basically you're an economist. So it's like as basic as that you have to get these words right, and then you're on a good platform because you are reading and speaking correctly. Otherwise, to jump to the conclusion that because we have a vulgar English conception of what these words are, you are going to make mistakes in reading. When other people are using these words as a technical phrase, you will make mistakes. And 2024 is a really important year in the journey of populism. So in a way, the problem of populism is a central organizing principle that gives us a deep insight into what has happened in the world for a long, long time. And many, many matters are coming to a head in 2024. So this is a good time for us to renew our acquaintance with this field, to understand some of the key ideas of this field. And then we'll show you some of the hotspots around the world where the story is being played out in 2024.
And what I also want to point out to gentle readers is that none of us are experts in this. We are not political scientists. We haven't spent decades studying it. Some of the subjects you've tackled in the economic domain, and we did a recent episode on energy, renewables, where you can say you do have deep knowledge. In this matter, we don't really have deep knowledge, but the stakes are high for us. We do have skin in the game. You have skin in the game. So we've spent some time reading about it, thinking about it, and all we'll do in a humble way is share that knowledge with you, and hopefully it'll help you, build some frames by which you can look at the world around you.
And please do help us. Okay, write comments where you disagree, where we have a mistake, where you have important readings that everybody should see. Okay, so this is an attempt at a conversation. We don't lay claim to expertise. We will be wrong on many things that we say today. Amit, it's only words, and words are all we have. So tell us, what is populism?
I never thought you were going to quote the Bee Gees at me, but well done. What is populism is a good question because it's actually the title of a wonderful book by Jan-Werner Muller, where, in terms of understanding the theory, it's an important book. I wrote a column on it a long time back. We'll link it from the show notes. But he points out that there are 7 things that populists have in common. So let's go through them one by one. Number 1, defining the people. Populists claim that everyone who supports them, they are the people, and no one else matters. Muller, in fact, writes a core claim of populism is that only some of the people are the people. In May 2016, Donald Trump, who's a classic populist, once said that what matters is the unification of the people, and the other people don't matter, right? So you're just kind of defining the people as the people who support you. In a similar way, you could argue that, hey, if you are for me, you are, a patriot, otherwise you're anti-national. So that can also happen.
Yeah. Similarly, I think Donald Trump refers to the press as the enemies of the people. In other words, the people who criticize me.
Yeah, and it's important to watch out for that kind of rhetoric. The second point is the anti elite rhetoric, right? So, populism is not just against pluralism, as we just discussed, it is against the elite. A common part of the rhetoric is that, hey, listen, we speak for you, the people, the common person. These elites sitting in, these big buildings in Washington, if you're talking about the US or wherever, these elites are destroying our country, they are robbing you. We know what's right for you, and we'll help you along the way.
And hiding in this is also a whole backlash against the liberal revolution of the last 500 years, where more and more human beings and individuals secured freedom and a first class opportunity to live a life. So, this could be about women, this could be about race. So, a variety of old forms of oppression have faded away, and the anti-elite stance is used to trigger off the conservative hearts of people, where you want the old thuggery of certain people oppressing others.
Point number three, they act like victims. Jan Muller says that majorities act like mistreated minorities. And it's kind of funny because everywhere it plays out in so many countries across the world where you'll find a majority which is behaving as if, oh, we've been oppressed for so long and blah, blah, blah. And we're like, you've been the majority all along. Things are okay.
Yeah. And this is used along with like a historical sense of grievance. They will dig out some event from 500 years ago or 50 years ago and exaggerate it, make conspiracy theories and nonsensical claims out of it. So, for example, in Germany, the Nazi party was that underclass rebellion against the elite. It would paint Jews, a tiny proportion of Jews who were, of course, brilliantly capable people who dominated success and achievement in so many areas of life. They were portrayed as like an evil conspiracy that is keeping the others down. So, keeping others down is a part of that story.
And I'll pick on the word others. The German theorist Carl Schmitt once said that what is essential to politics is having an enemy. That there is someone you can call an other. And, if you can't call an external invader an other and rally the people around that, then you have to find internal enemies. You have to kind of make that happen. And another sort of offshoot of that is that you'll have people who portray themselves as outsiders. I'm an outsider and blah, blah, blah. But actually, if you just think about it for like 15 seconds, they're hardcore insiders. Like you look at someone like Trump, who is, portrays himself as someone who's going against the establishment. He's been a crony capitalist for 40 years. Like, what are you talking about? He's deeply embedded in that whole system of lobbying and interest groups and cronyism and all of that. The fourth point Muller says is common to populist parties is that they tend to become monolithic. So you'll have populism emerge with one strong leader at the head of a party which becomes popular, and soon he dominates a party completely. It becomes like a personality cult, everything dies down. And the most tragic way in this, which this has played out for me, it's kind of heartbreaking, is what Trump has done to the Republican Party. And I am flabbergasted in how within 8 years, the Republican Party has changed character to the extent that it is, in most cases, the opposite of what it once stood for. A lot of Trump's policies, whether they are on economics and trade, etc., are the opposite of what Republican policies are. He's an enemy of free markets. Like when I think of his policies on trade, for example, they were identical in 2016 to Bernie Sanders, who's on the far left. Right? And they are absolutely anathema to what Republicans have believed in all the while. But what I have realized over the last many years, and again, it's a little disillusioning, is that a lot of people who claim to believe in principles are actually tribal. They claim to believe in principles because their tribe does so. But if the tribe changes its principles, they'll go along with that. The principles themselves don't matter so much. And this is just so sad.
So, what you say is very important. In the context of the state, political theory always teaches us that what you want is a depersonalized state, you want institutions. Now, not enough attention is paid to the idea that equally, just like the state should be institutionalized and it should feature dispersion of power, you also need political parties who are institutionalized, who have dispersion of power, who are not the iron hand of one person or two people. And so what happens in populism is that the political party as an institution gets gutted. It gets destroyed from inside, it hollows out, it loses its capability. And that actually has long term adverse consequences. So, in a way, the glory years of America were a successful two-party system where the Democratic Party and the Republican Party were institutions. And people came and went, but the party had a recognizable character, had a bureaucratic capability, had the capacity to nurture ideas and mount campaigns. And the destruction of the Republican Party is going to matter greatly for the United States in the coming 25 years.
The fifth characteristic that Muller talks about is proximity to the people, where a populist leader will always not just be anti-elite, but he'll pretend that I myself am, one of you. I worked in the mills, I worked in the factories, I toiled, I went hungry, etc., etc. And they will always, figure out ways to reach the people directly. Whether you're talking about Viktor Orban, right-wing populist, or Hugo Chavez from the past, left-wing populist, this is common. They'll portray themselves as one of the people speaking against the elite and so on and so forth. And this becomes incredibly important to their personal image and to the rhetoric and the narrative they're building around themselves.
And so, for example, you see Trump taking pride in photo ops where he's eating junk food because the elites have turned against junk food and poor people eat junk food. So you want to portray yourself, okay, I am non-elite, I am a man of the people, so I am eating junk food just like all of you do.
I can completely understand where someone says a hamburger is tasty. Yes, some hamburgers are tasty. But if you tell me a hamburger is good for you, there's a serious kind of problem with that. The sixth point Muller brings up, and I think it's a really important point, is that populists will aim for simplistic narratives. And I had even written a column about this. In fact, before I read Muller's book, I think it was in context of Trump in 2016 again, where my theory for why Trump was getting the kind of following he did is that he did not bring complicated narratives about what is wrong with the world and all. He kept it simple so people could understand. And simple, in his case, was simplistic and wrong. For example, he appealed to unemployed people in middle America by saying, hey, you're losing jobs. Where are your jobs going? Number one, your jobs are being shipped overseas. So, anti-free trade argument. Number two, illegal immigrants are coming and they're taking your jobs. So, anti-immigration argument. Now, both of these are extremely simplistic and not quite true, but they appeal to the common person. Suddenly, you can, tell yourself a story that appears to explain the world, and that also, again, going back to what Carl Schmitt says, gives you an other to rail against. Whereas if you sell like a deeply complicated narrative that why is there this unemployment problem in the Midwest, and you talk about how it's multifactorial and you talk about all those different aspects playing out, it's just difficult to understand. You can't reach out to people like that. Where people with integrity will care about the truth, and the truth is nuanced. So they will not avoid the nuance as far as possible. Whereas, populists don't care about integrity. They care about just sort of appealing to people's emotions and just getting them riled up, and simplistic narratives are a key part of that.
And one critical simplistic narrative that appeals to emotion, which requires an economy of thought, which goes well with the masses who, in any case, are not prone to deep knowledge and obtaining information, is the game of hatred. So it is very easy to make people angry, to pour salt on the fire of their biases and their preconceptions. So I always think that great leaders make us better than who we are. They bring out the best in us. They ask of us that find the good inside you. Whereas the populist leaders bring out the worst in us. They reduce us to our essential identity, and they blow oxygen on the embers of hatred and resentment that are inside each of us.
Beautifully said. And the thing is, look, Lofty emotions like love and solidarity will not make you run out to the poll to vote because it is urgent. Anger does, hatred does, and that's really sad. And but and I must at this point, to shift our attention away from politics to literature. I'm a writing teacher. I hate mixed metaphors, and you said pour salt on the fire. No, you do not. You can pour salt on a wound, and you can pour oil on a fire. Why would you pour salt on a fire, Rajesha?
Yeah, my mistake.
And finally, Muller's final point is conspiracy theories, where he says conspiracy theories are rooted in and emerge from the logic of populism itself. Because think about it, you got simplistic narratives, the elites are bad, etc., etc. You put all of them together, and you can have crazy conspiracy theories, ki ye ho raha hai, wo ho raha hai, etc., etc. And this is something you find common to all sort of populist movements, and wherever you look.
Religion is the opiate of the masses. Conspiracy theories are the opiate of the asses. This is a great checklist, and I encourage you, gentle reader, to grab each of these as a toolkit in the mind. We should be able to argue and reason based on these tools. I want to quickly respond saying I find it so fascinating that this is not about the old classification between left and right ideologies. This is a distinct world of populism versus responsible or whatever, right? The non-populism does not have a clear name as of yet, but we've got to recognize that there is populism of the left and there is populism of the right, and both are equally toxic. And we need to not play with the old binaries of leftist and rightist. Similarly, there can be a populism engine inside a variety of political systems. So Hitler was a populist, Chairman Mao was a populist, Lenin was a populist, Donald Trump is a populist. Okay, they're operating in very different political systems. So again, the simple binary of an authoritarian totalitarian system versus democracy doesn't get you the correct classification. Populism is an idea in and of itself, and it deserves to be understood as such and called out and measured through these kinds of concepts. The last thing I'd like to say is that, gentle reader, I have warned everybody that these are not areas of our expertise. We could well be circling the truth and fumbling on it every step along the way. In my reading of this field, I have understood the central engine of populism as being rousing the underclass to hate the elite. Okay, this is the French Revolution, this is Karl Marx, this is Hitler, this is Lenin, this is Mao, this is a whole bunch of populist movements all around the world, where of essence is the idea that there is a cultural elite, there is a business elite, there is an intellectual elite, and a political movement seeks to stoke hatred against them and ultimately command the state, the political elite, and put the knife into the other three. Okay, so that, in my understanding, is the populist project, that how to eviscerate the elite capability of a country, and of course that has very bad consequences. Gentle reader, you will be noticing my explicit use of the word elite because I want to torment the wokes in the audience as well. The idea that the word elite has become unfashionable and unacceptable is populism of the left. It is as bad as populism of the right. Okay, all the great truth and beauty and wealth creation is done by elites, and we should recognize it.
So I have a number of responses to that. Firstly, I'd like to say that, when you talk about the left and the right frame, the frame of left and right not mattering, that is so true. I've been ranting about it for years because honestly, in India, as far as I'm concerned, and really in many parts of the world, the frame that matters to me is freedom and authoritarianism, right? It is consent and coercion. That is a binary. That is how I look at it. Where are you on that line is what matters to me. In India, every single political party is, what we would call left in terms of economics and right in terms of social issues, right? There is no party in India ever, except for perhaps a golden period where things got better between 91 and 2011. We've had many episodes on that. But even there, the movement was on the margins and things got just a little better. But by and large, everyone who's ruled India, and I use the word ruled India, advisedly, everyone who's ruled India has been statist and anti-freedom, anti-free markets, anti-a free society, anti-free speech. It's just like that all the way. So the lens that I would like to look at it through is consent versus coercion, freedom versus authoritarianism. So I think that's a useful lens. Secondly, as far as elites are concerned, yes, I agree. Now I must at this point out something that I think you partly agree with me. When we've done episodes like Fixing the Knowledge Society on how academia is broken, I've often ranted about it. Frankly, I hate the elites as well. But I recognize that we are also part of the elites. But what you see with a lot of the elites in the country is that there is this complacence, and there is this sense of entitlement, and there is this immense condescension towards what the people want. And my point is, even if the people vote in someone who does not align with your values, that doesn't mean something is wrong with the people. It means something is wrong with you and your message and the way that you have been governing, and you need to introspect first. Having said that, I broadly agree with you that anti-elitism is especially bad because by default, it becomes anti-knowledge, it becomes anti-expertise. Therefore, instead of getting, what should a leader do? A leader should get the best economists in the country to advise him on economics, right? But if you take advice from quacks and you do ridiculous things which make no sense, which
Also
so many populists have
anti-wealth.
done. And exactly, that too. And that, all of those are something that we should worry about. Now I'll disagree with you on a very slight detail, in the sense that of Muller's 7 points, you were struck by the anti-elitism. I was struck by simplistic narratives, that I think everything emerges from having a simplistic view of the world, which speaks to something that is part of human nature. Human nature is what? The world is deeply complex. We can't figure it out. We understand the world by telling ourselves stories about it. Those stories tend to be simpler than the world itself. And when it comes to something like politics and economics and all that, it is so complex that simple stories are a feature, not a bug, for the normal person. In public choice theory, we use this term called rational ignorance. We have to live our lives. We have to earn a living. Who's got the time to get dope? So simplistic narratives are at the core of it. And to me, the hatred against elites is an example of a simplistic narrative which appeals. But again, it's a chicken and egg thing. It doesn't matter where it came from.
Uh, just one last aside before we'll move on to more fun things. You start at The Republic by Plato. He's actually very clear-eyed about democracy. He says, like, the people, this is not going to work too well. And in the modern times, you get the power of mass media. You think of Mussolini using radio. You think of Hitler organizing large-scale rallies for the first time. And then you come to television, and you come to social media and the internet. These things have become potent mechanisms by which we're able to get these kinds of simplistic messages out to the people. And there has been a great empowerment of the people in modern electoral processes. And then the simplistic narrative, which takes 5 seconds to think about and latch onto, and tribalistic attachment just wins the day.
And my whole point is that the people having the power is a damn good thing. That's the whole idea of a democracy. But what you need is two other things. One, you also need it to be a republic where you have a system of government that is designed via the constitution and other means to be something that protects the freedom of every individual, that protects their rights and constrains the role of the state. In India, we really have, the role of the people being constrained. So it's kind of the other way around. And in many parts of the world is defaulted to that. That's for me, that's important to note. And the second thing that we need besides the constitution and all the systemic safeguards is you need a healthy public discourse. So simplistic narratives do not win, and that the absence of that public discourse is, in a sense, I would say it is our failure, that people like us have to keep going out there and keep pushing these ideas and wade into that mess instead of just sitting around and complaining.
So, Amit, so far you've described the process of mobilization, about how you create the conditions for a French Revolution, how you create the conditions for the communist revolution in China in 1949. After a populist revolution succeeds and they have grabbed the reins of power and they are holding the state, what does it look like? What happens after that?
And it's actually interesting because here also there is a playbook, right? So we've spoken about how so many populists will have a playbook, including the 7 points we discussed on how to get to power. Now you need a completely separate playbook or an additional playbook rather when you get to power to consolidate that power and make sure you don't lose it. And again, Muller in his excellent book lays that out as well. And there are three things that are common to populist regimes. And number one is, in his words, they tend to occupy or colonize the state. Now, what does this mean? It means that, earlier we spoke about how in a healthy democracy you'll have institutions that are safeguards for you, that are kind of autonomous or independent, or, no, you can't use them as your puppets. So, what populists will tend to do once they get into power is they will tend to subvert these institutions. They will place their own people in charge in those institutions. They will, shut down or discredit institutions that they consider to be working against them and therefore by default against the people. And this is a process you see playing out time and time again. In some cases, it can be, done with brute force. And in some cases, it can be done over a period of time in subtle ways. Same as a parable of the frog inside the glass of water. You start boiling it, it doesn't notice, it dies, which is actually not true. By the way, it's a myth. If you heat the water and a frog is in it, the frog will at some point, it will jump out. But it's a great metaphor for what really happens. It can be slow and almost unseen, or it can be fast. But if anybody just takes a step back and looks at what is going on, it is visible in plain sight what's happening. The second thing that they do when they come to power is what Muller describes as they engage in mass clientelism. Now, what does this mean? This means that, one, this means cronyism, right? That you will pick some businesses over others, you will give them government contracts, you will dole out favors to them, you will put in regulation in place that protects them from competition, especially foreign competition, because remember, the foreigner is an enemy for so many populists. And you have this kind of clientelism happening where you have favored people who are sort of, benefiting from the power. In an earlier episode in Public Choice Theory, we spoke about the interplay between money and power. And there it is always sort of a tug of war in a good, healthy, democratic society where you will have interest groups going out, making their case. And, it's a complex and healthy process that happens. Over here, even the facade of that disappears, where you're just favoring the people you want to favor in, many different ways. And the quid pro quo is much more explicit than it seems.
On a related note, of course, a variant of clientelism is doling out taxpayer money into one subsidy program after another. So again, the left loves subsidy programs, but we have to call them out for what they are, which is no more than a crude form of political clientelism, where we try to go after one political lobby after another. And it has just been so normalized, we don't even notice it anymore. In the history of Rome, there is a beautiful phrase which describes the ways in which tyrannical masters protect their power. It is called bread and circus. Okay, so one is bread. You just give bread to the people and you mollify them with some subsidies and some transfers of bread. And the other is circus. You organize the spectacle of gladiators in the Colosseum all the time, and you drug the people, you fill their minds with the spectacle. So the noise on TV, the noise on social media is the everyday drumbeat of propaganda, and you just strip away the ability of people to think and concentrate on the actual issues that matter. So bread and circus is the machinery of the modern populist.
Beautifully put. And the third point, and I'll come back to social media later because I have some musings on that. But the third point that Muller makes, what parties tend to do when they're in power, is they shut down dissent in civil society, right? Now, Vladimir Putin, Viktor Orban, the PIS in Poland, they have many things in common. In fact, all of these in common. And one of those things is that they targeted NGOs. One of the first things they did is that they started shutting down NGOs everywhere. Why? Because NGOs are one visible way in which civil society can express itself and look after itself. And often this has unintended consequences in the sense even NGOs they would not otherwise oppose get shut down as a result of these moves. And really, to me, NGOs in a sense are just a symbol, but this is common, shutting down dissent in civil society. And a great way of doing this is the use of the chilling effect. You don't need to throw everyone in jail. You make an example of a couple of people, and then everybody goes like, shit, man, we got to be careful of what we say. We don't want to get into trouble, right? And the chilling effect then shuts that down. And over a period of time, people don't even kind of realize what is going on. They don't even realize why they are silent. They may not even think they're silent.
Yeah. And I think of this as a special case of the larger proposition earlier, which is to monopolize all the organizations of society. So in China, there is a Communist Party group inside every company. Okay, and that's how every systematic organization in the country is taken under control of the state.
So, Ajay, like you, I find it so magical that sometimes, something, it's like that feeling that you get. Okay, did you use dial up connections in your life? Of course you did. Yeah, so do you remember when we would download photographs on a dial up connection in the 90s of Samantha Fox or otherwise? What you would first get is something that is really pixelated, and then gradually it comes into high definition and is clear, and you get the thrill. Whatever the object is, you get a thrill that you can see clearly. And I sometimes feel like that about ideas. That for me, populism was it's just. I thought it's something like popular, and that's how everybody gets introduced to the word. But then you read more and you discover these frames of seeing, and I just find that that's so beautiful and miraculous that we can actually do that and make ourselves see better. And what we've discussed in the earlier part of this episode is a frame that got a lot of illumination to me and helped me see the world better, I think. And it's, there's a lot of history in this, especially if you read Muller's book and you read other books on populism. There's a lot of history there. There is a lot of theory there. But I want to step away from that now and come to the present moment, 2024. Tell me about populism in 2024 and why you're so worried.
Yeah. So 2024 is shaping up as a very important year in this journey. I'd like to talk about 4 countries because I happen to know a little bit about them. The United States, Israel, uh, Hungary, and Poland. Okay, each of them are countries where I have a little bit of knowledge. Gentle reader, by no means am I an expert. For our Hungarian readers, I apologize in advance for how I'm butchering the complexities of your country. But I feel that they are all little examples of these grand stories playing out exactly as you say, that then you see it in sharp focus and it helps us to understand the larger theory. So it's interesting to look at these stories because they put structure and detail on the idea, but also because the fate of the world is on the line. 2024 is a critical year, and there are many, many countries in which this drama is also playing out. Okay, this is also playing out in France with Marine Le Pen. It is also playing out in the UK. Okay, there are many, many countries where there is a very dangerous contest around populism. I'm going to talk about 4 countries where I have a little bit of knowledge. Okay, so let's start with the United States. The United States has a Republican Party and a Donald Trump that has just gone like way populist. This is not your father's Republican Party. This is something completely different. Now, what I find remarkable about the United States is in 2 steps. Step 1, that when Donald Trump was in office, he was actually not able to subvert the institutions to a significant extent. So he asked the IRS, the Income Tax Department, and the FBI to go investigate and torment his rivals. And by and large, they refused to do so. Just like, can you think about that? How marvelous is that? How wonderful is that? That there was the institutional quality, there was the institutional depth, that the populist, the leader would ask things of his own coercive arms. And the coercive arms would say, no, this is not legal. This violates our rules. We refuse to do it. We will not do it. Okay, and that was really an amazing story of the strength of institutions of the United States that protected the country. Okay, and now that leads to part 2 of the story. So I want to focus on Jeff Bezos, one of the richest people in the world. First, Jeff Bezos explicitly, clearly staked out an anti-Trump position in the public domain. Okay, that's pretty cool. Okay, rich people having the nerve to stand up to a government. How often does that happen? Again, it was a comment on the institutional quality of the United States, that a rich person said, it's safe. So in a way, rich people have hostages. They have the most to lose, and in a way, rich people could be the most timid because you just don't want to mess with the government. But in fact, in the United States, Jeff Bezos, the richest person in the country, had no qualms, had no difficulty standing up in public, challenging Trump, owning the Washington Post, one of the most important newspapers that exposed the misdeeds of the Trump period. Again, I say, wow. Okay, and then you get to the 2020 election. Trump was not able to disrupt the ability of the Democratic Party to organize. The Democratic Party was able to raise campaign contributions, was able to have advisors, was able to have volunteers, was able to run a rally in the street, was able to get the vote out, all the way to the 2020 elections. So I think a lot that I feel an election is not fair and free if the counting is done correctly. An election is only fair and free if rival opposition parties are able to fundraise, are able to have advisors openly talking about them, participating in them, are able to have a free press that will speak openly about what various political parties are saying, are able to build an organization without fear of coercive arms of the state attacking the individuals or the organization, and are able to go out into the street, organize rallies, and get the vote out. Okay? If you don't have all that, you actually don't have a free and fair election. So I feel that many people, including some good thinking people in India, have been completely confused around the word elections. An election is not fair if the votes are counted correctly. An election is only fair if the entire surrounding infrastructure that creates a competitive landscape is fair. And you could think that, imagine if Donald Trump had been able to block rallies by the Democrats, then how many percentage points of a vote share would it have made? Okay? And that's the correct analytical construct to use, that under the conditions of state power being applied against opposition parties, how many percent of vote share of a difference did it make? And then that is the extent to which your elections may not be free and fair. And my third observation around the United States is I'm absolutely blown by how small the margin was. I mean, Biden just kind of squeaked through. It was not large margins. A large part of the sullen, angry underclass of America is fine with Donald Trump, despite the mind-blowing misbehavior of his 4 years, the failures on COVID, the scandals upon scandals, the difficulties on collaborating with Vladimir Putin. You take your pick. Still, Donald Trump remains viable. It is a very scary message that in America, where freedom of speech is fine, the media has worked fine, the intellectuals have worked fine, they just about barely squeaked through in 2020. And we don't yet know how it will work in 2024. Donald Trump remains viable in 2024. It's a failure of the United States justice system that we are standing here in middle 2024 and basically the cases have not played through in time. And so basically the voter is just confused. There are allegations on both sides. And so net, nothing has happened to Donald Trump. Okay, now America is the most important country in the world. This matters greatly. If Donald Trump comes back to power, it's going to be very bad for the whole world, and all of us have skin in the game. So this is my story number one. It's a really important thing for us to understand, for us to watch.
I agree with everything you said. I think these are profoundly important points to underscore, and the US demonstrates that the power of having good institutions and having a good design that cannot be subverted, and also the point you made about how do we define a free and fair elections. It's not just about votes counted correctly, which I believe by and large they are in India, but it's about, is a party free to campaign? Are people free to speak their mind? Is there free speech, etc., etc.? All of that matters. I would add an interesting point to Bezos. Now, Jeff Bezos is one of my heroes. If I had to make a list of people who've improved the world in the last 30, 40 years, he would be right there near the top. Incredible wealth creator, disruptor, absolutely brilliant. And again, the far left loves to hate him because they hate all rich people. But, quite apart from that. And the point that you made is that, when he took over the Washington Post continued to run anti-Amazon stories and anti-Bezos stories, which tells you not just about the strength of the institution institution, but also when you have strong institutions, there are certain values that come out of those, which then float above the institution itself. They become part of the culture. And that is so incredible and so beautiful. And in many other parts of the country, that's missing. So Ajay, let's talk about Israel.
Uh, Israel is a sad story. Just to put my biases on the table, I'm deeply sympathetic to the project of Israel. Okay, I'm just putting my biases up front. And for many years, I've just admired many things about that country. They came out of nothing and a war in 1948, and they built one of the world's great countries. Israel is the preeminent economic and military power of the Middle East. It is a civilizing force in the Middle East. I want to give you one trivial anecdote around this. Did you know every day there are dozens or sometimes hundreds of illegal migrants who run across the border from adjoining Arab countries and become illegal migrants into Israel? Okay, and what's going on? Legalization of homosexuality. That's it. If you are in the other countries, the governments are monstrous, the society is monstrous. Whereas Israel has liberal freedoms. And so homosexuals like to run away from all the surrounding Middle Eastern countries and live in Israel. Okay, that is the civilizing force, the decency of Israel. Unfortunately, things have gone very wrong in certain ways. At a big strategic level, Israel was originally populated by the intellectual elite of Europe. Okay, the Jews that came in from Europe had phenomenal human capital, knowledge. They brought the entire 1,000 years of the civilizational package, which actually is great raw material around which to build the cultural elite, the business elite, the intellectual elite, and the state. And so many things came together quite nicely, and Israel became an advanced economy extremely successfully. After the fall of the USSR, Israel got a very high scale of immigration of Jews from all over Eastern Europe, but most notably Russia. And they brought a very different conservative package of values. So they were basically wedded to old hardliner ways of life on questions of religion, of women, of personal freedoms, and so on. And that has moved the dial of Israeli electoral politics in a very unpleasant manner. And it has created the window for a hardline, right-wing, conservative, nationalism, religion, conservative values kind of package to succeed. So it's very strange and unfortunate that one of the great successful countries of the world is back to battling the demons of the 20th century, where you're dealing with religion and nationalism and freedom of women and the social oppression. The whole conservative package is back in electoral salience in Israel. So there is a war for the soul of Israel that is afoot, and it is alive and well. And there was a great battle around the judiciary. The uh, leader of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, tried to create conditions where the executive would have veto powers on the selection of judges. Okay, and for anybody who knows a little bit about the working of democracy, that is anathema. You cannot have the executive controlling who becomes a judge. That is just not done. And there was this absolutely amazing upswell from the population where the people stepped out onto the streets and mobilized. And once again, you have to look at the greatness of Israel. Very often in many countries, military folk tend to be low on knowledge and tend to be militaristic and right-wing and male values and conservative values. In Israel, again and again, it was the people from the military background, from elite military formations, who stepped out into the society and said, look, we are soldiers. We have given our life and our blood to protect this country. But we do not believe that the executive branch should ride roughshod over the judicial branch. So there was an amazing upswell of the organizing power of the society, which pushed back against Netanyahu and got a 75% but yet not 100% victory on these questions. And it was a great moment in the history of Israel, and it showed you the liberal core, the intellectual capacity of that country, including amongst military folk, who are very often the first to sign on to the destruction of institutions in the country. So, lots of people suffer from a strongman machismo, but the military folk seem to suffer from it the most. In Israel, it was military people who led that intellectual upswell with the concept that separation of powers is important. The executive should not control the judiciary, and it is not okay if the executive will have either a veto power or appointment power on judges. Okay. Then came the Hamas disaster, and in many ways, there is blame with Netanyahu and the executive for completely fumbling the defense of Israel on the lower boundary. Once the war finishes, we expect that the Israeli political process will play out on these questions. I just want to say the soul of Israel is up for grabs. We don't know which way this will go. And I say this as a friend of Israel. Okay, I'm a great admirer of Israel. I love that country. I admire that country. But it is heartbreaking how bad things have worked out for Israel, and they could well collapse into just one more mediocre country. They could just become one more combination of religion and prejudice and socially conservative people and oppression of women and male values, and that whole bad package could end up winning in Israel, because it is touch and go, and we don't know which way this will go.
I'll take a brief digression, though it's related. And gentle reader, this is for you. That when the Hamas attacks happened and when Israel retaliated, there was this great public demand, including in our comments, saying, "Hey, why don't you and Ajay talk about it?" And we decided that we're not going to talk about it because we simply don't have enough knowledge. It is deeply complex, so we're not going to wade in there. I still want to kind of summarize my position on it because I think it ties in with what you said, and it's what I think is a kind of a nuanced position. It's not a black or white position. I am against the Israeli state and what they're doing right now. I am against Hamas. I think they're evil. I care deeply for the Palestinian people. I sympathize with the Israeli people. I am with the people on both sides. I am against Hamas and the Israeli state as it currently is. And this is just, even this nuanced position is going to get you attacked because everything is black and white. If you speak against Israel, it is assumed you are anti-Semitic, which is daft. If you speak against Hamas, it is assumed that you're against the Palestinian people, which is daft. In my opinion, Hamas is the worst thing that happened to Palestine. So this is sort of my broad intuitive position, but I have so little knowledge of the history and the politics relative to what I should, that I'm not going to make any further comment on it. And everything that you just said about Israel is sort of new to me. I didn't realize that there was a battle for the soul going on, as it were, and it's something I'll be following. So let's talk about Hungary now.
Hungary is in Central Europe, and look, it's the country of John von Neumann. Okay, this is some of the greatest people and thinkers of the European civilization have come from Hungary. You expect something, good from Hungary. So after the fall of the USSR, many East European countries got started. They were off to the races, and one expected Hungary would do well. Okay, Czechoslovakia did well. You would expect Hungary would do well. And in fact, things went terribly wrong. And for me, it was a reminder that it is very difficult to rise out of a thuggish regime, the communist regime, and create good institutions and create sound institutions. And today, Hungary is gloriously standing out in the center of Europe, despite being a member of the European Union, despite being a member of NATO, despite coming under enormous pressure from the civilizing force of the European Union and of NATO. And it has turned into a thuggish, right-wing, conservative country. And it has no redeeming features. On paper, they will run elections, but precisely in the sense that I was saying earlier, you can't meaningfully be an opposition party. They'll come after you. Like the police will attack an opposition party. There was a glorious organization in Hungary called the Central European University. The Hungarian government came after that and drove them out, and today they've relocated into a free country. So Hungary is controlled by de facto a dictator. There are some niceties of a party and elections, but de facto you can't compete because the press is gone. The freedom to mobilize is gone. You can't fundraise. You can't be a meaningful political party that can actually fight in a meaningful election. So on paper, you will say that, yeah, there is voting and you're counting. But the entire upstream journey of organizing a political party, the party as an institution, the fundraising of the party, the rallies in the streets, all that is absent. So Mr. Orban keeps winning. He's won 5 times. And Hungary is a black eye in the heart of Europe. And we just don't know how this will come back. So Hungary is a reminder that even in the heart of Europe, you can have a complete breakdown of any kind of liberal values, and there is no sign of how this ends. There is no hope on Hungary getting fixed.
I have to complain again that you're mixing metaphors. A black eye in the heart of Europe. Ajay Shah, what is this? Yeah, it's really sad to watch all this play out. And as you said, a country that has given so many great minds and great thinkers to the world. And it also tells you about the need for eternal vigilance, as Jefferson put it. You can never assume that, okay, we've achieved civilization or liberalism or whatever, that we always have to keep fighting for our values. Otherwise, our baser instincts can take over.
Yeah. Every generation has to fight its own battles.
So, Ajay, Poland.
And I've told you many sad stories, and now I want to tell you a story of redemption and rapture. Okay, so Poland is either world number 2 or world number 1 in terms of being one of the saddest countries of the world. I feel deeply about Poland. It was created out of the Treaty of Versailles. It, for centuries, has been savaged by one monstrous country on one side, Germany, and another monstrous country on another side, Russia. On the 1st of September 1939, they were invaded from one side by Nazi Germany, and on the 16th of September 1939, they were invaded from the other side by the Russians. And after the Second World War, they got swallowed by the Russians, who installed a communist party. Stalin took care to make a list of 40,000 people of the Polish elite, and they were murdered. Okay, just pause to think. For any country that you love, imagine a carefully made list of the 40,000 people who make up the intellectual and the business and the cultural elite of the country, and imagine that they get murdered. It is like destroying the foundations of the country, and then how will you start over? It takes a long time. It takes generations to rebuild that kind of knowledge and capacity, because the culture is transmitted by people, and those 40,000 individuals were disproportionately important as transmitters of knowledge and culture and values and norms. That's where Poland began. And then Poland was amongst the first in building an anti-communist movement, with Lech Walesa organizing the port workers of Poland. And then in 1989, when the fall of communism took place, Poland enthusiastically took to trying to rebuild the country in a modern image. And they became a part of the European Union. They became a part of NATO. I visited Poland in about 2005, and I've had the privilege of having extensive conversations with the nation builders of the new Poland. And I remember how much they told me that the EU was their stabilizing force, because on a large number of questions, they did not actually have to develop institutions from scratch. You got a rough working draft from the EU of what a law roughly looks like, of what an institution roughly looks like. And it gave them a great leg up, and they rapidly succeeded. They were an economic success. For example, Poland and Ukraine started out at similar values at the end of communism, but Poland took off and became a successful economy, while Ukraine was not. Poland was in the EU and in NATO, and Ukraine was not. Okay, and Russia was able to constantly meddle in the politics of Ukraine. By and large, the politics of Poland worked out better. So for a long time, we thought Poland was a success story, that in a rapid time after 1989, Poland was able to kindle democratic institutions and become a good liberal country with freedom, with economic freedom, with political freedom. Sadly, that was not to be. And there was a 10-year period in which Poland really collapsed. There was something called the Law and Justice Party, which was just a simple unreconstructed populist movement. It was an alliance between farmers and Christians and thugs. Okay, these came together and they became a conservative force. So they became opposed to the freedom of women, they became opposed to Western influences, they became opposed to foreigners, and they had enough to get a vote share, and they monopolized power. They made it very difficult to compete. Okay, and so once again, there was a time when it was deeply disturbing that like Poland was the star pupil, where in a post-communist environment they got their act together, but even they collapsed into a populist disaster. Now, I want to point out one thing that really struck me, and gentle reader, I'm not an expert, so please people correct me where I'm wrong, and write comments about how what I'm saying doesn't make sense.
They'll correct you if you're right also.
Please correct me if you think I'm right. There is a measure of democracy that is run by Freedom House, which is decent. There are actually multiple rival democracy measures, and they all disagree somewhat, but they all agree quite a bit. I've got used to reading the Freedom House measure. In many ways, VDEM is better, but it's more work to use the VDEM measure. It's very easy to use the Freedom House measure. I was struck by the fact that at the time of the elections of October 2023, Poland was at a freedom score of 80 on 100, while Hungary was at a freedom score of 65 on 100. And as an aside, Israel is at a score of 74 on 100. And that's an interesting range. Okay, so let me say it again. Hungary, where currently it looks like democracy has been fully destroyed, gets a democracy score of 65 on 100. Okay, so what I conclude is that these techniques of monopolizing power are able to shatter a meaningful electoral competition at the level of 65 on 100. Okay, so you can, people call it a free and fair election, but basically, I think this is a lack of understanding of what elections are. Okay, you should not just be counting the voting and the counting. You should be thinking of the entire forces that lead up to an election: the freedom to organize, the freedom to fundraise, the freedom for people to speak up openly, the freedom of press, the safety of rich people, all these things. Okay, property and freedom is a crucial part of that package. So I conclude that a 65 on 100 score is consistent with the sustained loss of democracy, and that's where Hungary is. Israel is, we don't know where it goes, and they're currently at 74, and we'll see. And there is a proud intellectual and other elite capacity in Israel, and we'll see how they are able to fight their way out of this situation. We don't know. Poland, in contrast, was at 80 upon 100. So it was the highest level of democracy out of the three countries that I'm describing. And in October 2023, there was an election, and the center-left party, led by Donald Tusk, actually won the election. Okay, and right now, Poland is coming back. So Poland is a great story where an important country at the border of Europe, which is eyeball to eyeball facing Russia, has turned back from a toxic populism of 10 years where it was a failure story alongside Hungary, and it's actually come back. And they are now facing the very, very messy problems of how do you undo all the institutional damage that was done by the populists while still respecting rule of law and due process. So you can't just send the police and grab the Chief Justice. Okay, you've got to do things in a way that respects the rule of law. So Poland is right now in that very interesting, troubling process. And they are very, very lucky compared to many other countries in the world that they are ensconced inside the EU and NATO, which are two great civilizing forces. And that just makes life so much easier for the institution building, and it becomes a ballast that helps and carries a country forward. So in short, I think that in the grand story of populism as described by you, there are many, many very interesting battles that are playing out in 2024. And there are many countries that I don't know well, Italy and France and Britain and many others. But I've tried to describe 4 countries where I've been curious, and I do not lay claim to expertise. But I just felt that these are interesting stories, and for all of us as a community, let's think about these issues, let's mull over these issues, let's read a little more, let's argue with each other. And I feel it will improve our understanding of the world. It will make us better situationally aware. And I just want to remind all of us, as you said at the start, all of us have skin in the game. Okay, in each of these countries, what happens is going to matter to us.
Ask not for who the leaf turns for thee. But, I want to just, when you said that, Poland was like a beacon and we all looked for it for hope, and then look what happened. At that moment, the thought that went through my mind, and this could be a t shirt line also, is you are my Poland. Right, and I can, gentle reader, imagine Ajay Shah right here, from being, the genteel, nuanced intellectual he is, suddenly goes out there and starts burning trucks and beating people up and all of that. And that's kind of what happened to Poland. But maybe there's hope. Maybe we can bring you back even from that after it happens.
Yeah. And for people who read history, there are few things more moving than visiting Poland. Okay, I spent 3 days visiting sites in Warsaw, just weeping like a baby. It is something amazing what you feel in that place.
In a sense, I'm just thinking aloud, but the story of any place is also a story of human civilization. And Poland, of course, was in the center of so much that happened in the last century. The turmoil of World War II and all of that is, of course, there. And it's really interesting that if you just visit a place as an empty, as a tourist who is going there without any impressions, you will see buildings and streets and notice the weather. But the deeper you go, everything suddenly has so much meaning and significance.
The magic of travel is the child of learning culture, learning history. Then travel comes alive. Otherwise, you're just sightseeing. Then, just go to the beach in Goa, you're fine. So, Amit, we've had a lot of fun. You laid the spinal cord of the foundations of the theory of populism. And I told 4 stories in 2024, which I'm reading with great sadness and fear and trepidation. How do you put this together? What are you thinking and feeling as we come to the end of this episode?
I can't put this together like you because you mix metaphors again. The spinal cord of the foundation. My brain is going to hell. This is like, some
The structural engineering of this episode.
the structural engineering of this episode. I have a thought and a question for you based on that, where at one level we say that, okay, history may not repeat, but it rhymes. Right, and you see these commonalities across populist movements, across different eras. But at the same time, I think we are living in a unique era where some things are different, and one of the things which is different is the incredible pace of change of technology and the incentives that social media has created. We have discussed in past episodes about how Timur Kuran's notion of preference falsification, and you can have preference cascades where suddenly there's a cascade in one particular direction where people express their hidden desires, or those hidden desires get amplified by social media. And when I think of the incentives of social media, I think the incentive everywhere is towards the extremes. Like, typically normal person joins Twitter, they want to feel comfortable, they want a sense of community, they might join an ideological tribe, there is a feeling that, hey, I'm part of something bigger than me, whether on the left or the right or wherever, right? And then to raise your status within that party and feel that you within that ideological tribe, and to feel that you belong more, you start doing performative things, you start signaling, you start attacking people on the other side, never arguments, you start attacking people on your own side for not being pure enough, who then get cancelled. And what this does is that even though it is a vocal minority that does this, I believe the silent majority is not like this. It incentivizes a move towards the extremes. And something that I wondered about a lot in 2016 when the US elections happened is that how is it Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump? We all know about the median voter theorem. The median voter theorem in politics basically is that you might swing on one side towards the primaries to appeal to the faithful of your own party, but in the central election you're basically so close to the center, you're practically next to each other. And this is kind of held everywhere, that Jeb Bush, Hillary Clinton, practically identical, frankly. You might have some difference in the interest groups they listen to, but otherwise really centrist, one slightly left, one slightly right. But you had Trump, who broke the whole thing. And then you would imagine, okay, somehow an extremist managed to, get the party nomination, but in the general election, he's going to get smashed. He didn't. He won. And now you have a similar move to the extremes happening in a sense across the world, and in a sense even in the US, where the left is swinging in that way. Like a lot of far left politics again is populist and focuses on simplistic narratives. Like I often like to say that, wokeism begins where liberalism ends. Liberalism is about individual freedom, individual rights, the autonomy of every person, whereas wokeism thinks only in terms of groups, and you have these simplistic narratives. Now, I think of myself as someone who contains multitudes. All of us, every individual contains multitudes. But there is a certain kind of ideological thinking which will foist a group identity on you. And along with that will come a narrative of victimhood or oppression. And then that is the only lens you're seeing the world through. It's a version of the class warfare of the olden times. And it is simplistic, it is unhelpful, it polarizes us. And when I see the polarizing politics everywhere around us, I then begin to worry that are we now left in a contest between the populism of the right and the populism of the left, which fundamentally, both lead to disaster as we've seen throughout the 20th century. So, what are sort of your thoughts on these trends that are flowing?
So as the poet said, somebody shout, somebody scream, what happened to the post war dream? And today we're ready to answer social media. I think, in addition to all the things you said, I also think that social media creates a vulgar familiarity of facsimile of knowledge, where you think that 140 characters is equal to knowledge. And suddenly people become cocky and comfortable, and everybody around the dinner table is clueless, but you're comfortable mouthing truths. Like when I look back at my father's world and the people that he spoke with, there was so much care and nuance, and people would say, I have not studied this well. I have only read 4 books on this subject. Okay, that kind of thing has been replaced by 140 characters. And I don't see a way out. I don't see how this gets solved. I don't see how this gets sorted. So there is no great way out other than our striving. And so for example, for any of our gentle readers who may have thought about left and right, I feel it's useful if we will start rehabilitating the word elite.
So, Ajay, what's your recommendation for this week?
There is a Walt Disney cartoon, there's a Walt Disney animation movie called Beauty and the Beast. In that, there is the girl Belle who has a book, and then there is the male character, okay? Conservative, toxic masculinity, all that stuff. And he flips through the pages and he says, there are no pictures. And she says, some people can use their imagination. Okay, so based on this, I wish to say that my book recommendation is a repetition of before. It is On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder. And if your favorite WhatsApp uncle needs pictures, there is now a beautiful illustrated On Tyranny that you should give every WhatsApp uncle in your life. And Amit, what are your recommendations for us today?
Well, one, of course, I would say that the book that taught me a lot about populism, What is Populism by Jan-Werner Muller. That, of course, everyone should read. That's an obvious recommendations. Related books, in the past I've recommended George Orwell's essays on the show, and now I want to recommend his two great novels, 1984 and Animal Farm, and they will both teach you so much about politics in the world. They're just masterpieces. I still have a softer corner for his essays, just a great genius, a great writer. But 1984, man, it's a future written in the past.
Yeah. I spent most of my life worrying about 1984, and sometimes I feel like almost without noticing, we stumbled into Lord of the Flies. The modern social media dystopia is more Lord of the Flies. It is just disgusting people bullying and tormenting each other. You don't even need the state to make you miserable.
Beautifully put. And I want to sort of end with a message for our gentle readers that much of what we have spoken about may seem like what you might think, what relevance does it have to me? No matter where in the world you are, you might think this is somewhere far away. It doesn't matter for me. And all I'll say is that we are human beings, and we all have skin in the game. This matters to all of us. So, think about these principles, use this frame, look around you, and hopefully 2024 will not be such a bad year after all.